Good afternoon and welcome to the Bible Study Studio. My name is Sonia McCullough Lockridge and I am your host, and I joy to come to you in this fashion. Now, today we are on day four of 90 days through the Word. 90 days through the Word, day 4. And the first family is showing out in the book of Genesis. Before we get to Exodus, the first family is showing their self. And tomorrow will be day 5, and we will start our reading in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, we will start our reading tomorrow. But today, our reading found us in Genesis 40:12 through Genesis 50:26. So today we read through chapter 40 of Genesis through the end of Genesis. We read, that's like 10 chapters of Genesis in one day. We are through reading the book of Genesis as of today. Now, yesterday, we ended with the cupbearer and the baker and their dreams. The cupbearer, the baker, and their dreams. Now, their dreams that Joseph interpreted, unfortunately, for the baker came true. Their dreams for the baker, Joseph's interpretation of the dreams did come true for the baker and the cupbearer. Unfortunately for the baker, it was a dream of doom and gloom. But for the cupbearer, it was good news. And he gained a new position in Pharaoh's domain. But once he gained a new position in Pharaoh's domain, Pharaoh had a dream. And the cupbearer had promised Joseph that he would remember him once he got to Pharaoh's house, but he did not. He forgot all about him until Pharaoh had a dream. Now, Pharaoh had a dream and went to some magicians, and they could not interpret the dream, and so Pharaoh was concerned about this dream, so he talked to the cupbearer about it, and the cupbearer remembered Joseph, and Joseph came and interpreted the dream for him, for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was like, wow, you are wise and smart and you're all of that. And so at this point, Pharaoh makes Joseph ruler of the land and of his household and all the land. The only person higher than Pharaoh in the land is Joseph. So the leadership goes like this: Pharaoh, Joseph in the land of Egypt. Pharaoh, Joseph. He is the head man in charge of all the land of Egypt and of all of Pharaoh's household. Joseph is now in charge as of chapter 41. So that's how 41 went. 42, chapter 42. The dream was about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, 7 years of drought. Now, in the 2 years past of the drought, and Jacob and his family are in the drought just like everybody else, but they make it for 2 years. They're good for 2 years, okay? But by the end of the second year, they're running out of food, running out of grains, and the drought is severe. No food, death is near. So Jacob hears the rumor that there's some food in Egypt, there's some grain in Egypt, because during the 7 years of plenty, as the head man in charge, Joseph went out throughout the land and he gathered and he stored food and grain for these 7 years of drought, the 7 years of famine. So, when the famine was continuing, Joseph had food and grain to sell. And so Jacob had heard about this. And so he sent the 10 brothers to Egypt from Canaan to buy grain. And once they get there, who do they run into? None other but Joseph. But the brothers, they do not recognize Joseph in his rulership. They do not recognize him at all. By this point in time, after Pharaoh made him ruler, he also got Joseph a wife, and of a priest. He got him a wife from a daughter of a priest as a wife. So, one of the benefits of being the ruler over Egypt was a handpicked wife for Joseph. So, nevertheless, when the brothers arrive on the scene in Egypt to buy grain, Joseph sees them and he recognizes them. But they do not see him nor recognize him. And so Joseph approaches them and starts asking them all of these questions about their father and their brother that's still at home, which is Benjamin. And they answer the questions, but Joseph begins to accuse them of being spies. And they're like, dude, we're not spies. We're not spies. We heard there was food here, and we came to get food and grain. All we want to do is buy some food and grain and go back to from where we came. So Joseph cons them into thinking that he thinks that they are spies, and he demands that they go home and get their youngest brother Benjamin and bring him back. So, but part of the demand is that one of the brothers stay for 3 days, or I think it's 3 days. One of the brothers stays in Egypt while the other brothers go back and get the younger brother to prove that they are not spies. So this is just Joseph's way of manipulating the situation to get Benjamin in Egypt. And so once he gets Benjamin in Egypt, I should look at my notes. Once he gets Benjamin in Egypt, then he has this dinner. Or does he have a dinner at that point? Okay, so once he gets Benjamin in Egypt, he places his silver cup, or has his silver cup placed in Benjamin's bag. And then when they leave, he says that Benjamin stole this silver cup, and goes on in some more accusatory fashion to demand that they be more truthful with him. And he finally reveals that he is Joseph, their not dead brother. He finally reveals that he is Joseph, their not dead brother. And so they have a point of reunion, a point of reuniting, and him and Benjamin have an embrace, because Benjamin is actually Joseph's only full brother. Benjamin is actually Joseph's only full brother. All the other brothers are half brothers. So at this point in time, he sends for his daddy. So he sends the brothers back to get Papa Jacob. And Papa Jacob, so one thing that has to happen when they go back to get Papa Jacob is they have to reveal what it is they actually did to Joseph for him to still be alive, for him to be alive and never been dead. So their age-old plot is revealed when they have to reveal to Jacob that Joseph is living and that Joseph is the ruler of all of Egypt. And so Jacob returns to Egypt and reunites with his favorite son. And they set about rekindling their relationship. And Jacob actually lives in Egypt for 17 years. And Pharaoh, with Pharaoh's permission, they are allowed to live in Egypt for 17 years as long as there's their herdsmanship, as long as they take care of the livestock. Now, this was beneficial since there's 5 years left of the drought. There's 5 years left of the famine. So this is a beneficial occupation for this first family, because that means that once the famine becomes very severe, and it does, then the people of the land have sold their land. First of all, they sold their property in order to be able to buy grain. And then next, they sold their animals in order to be able to buy grain. And finally, they sold themselves into slavery in order to eat and not die. Because this famine was severe. 5 times in our reading from chapter 41 of 56 to 47:20 are the words, the famine was severe. 5 times in our reading for today. So this famine is severe. And that's where we leave off. The people are selling themselves into slavery in order for them to eat, live, and not die, because they've sold everything else they have during this famine. And who did they sell it to? Joseph and Pharaoh. Joseph and Pharaoh. But meanwhile, the first family is allowed to live in Goshen. The first family is allowed to live in Goshen. Now, the first family, they're Hebrews. And this is the land of Egypt. And Egyptians and Hebrews are not allowed to eat together. So that's why they live in Goshen. And while they're living in Goshen, because of the famine, they're able to take care of all the livestock, because this is and was their occupation. Joseph was well aware of this, because he, being Pharaoh's right-hand man, knew when it came down to what it all came down to, that they were going to need people to take care of this livestock during this famine, when the people of the land had to result in selling off their livestock so they could even eat it all. This is not a good time for the people of the land of Egypt. But because of their former association with Joseph, the first family is allowed to survive. But toward the end of Genesis, Jacob dies, and he lived 17 years in Egypt. Joseph gets permission from Pharaoh to return his daddy's body home to Canaan. And then the brothers become fearful because Jacob's no longer living, so they think that Joseph is still mad at him, that he's still holding a grudge. And he explains to them that the reason why he's not mad at them is because they meant all that for evil, but the Lord meant it for good. So then finally, Jacob dies, but before he dies, he blesses all of his children and his grandchildren. Incidentally, he blesses his grandchildren out of order, Manasseh and Ephraim, out of order, but this is the order in which the Lord was leading him to bless them. And he dies. His body is taken back to Canaan. And then Joseph eventually dies, but his body remains at the end of Genesis in a coffin in Egypt. Now, that is not a good thing. That is not a good thing, because he is a Hebrew. And the Hebrew people wanted to be buried together. And so ultimately, further in the Bible, Joseph's bones are moved to his homeland of Canaan. So that's our reading review for today. I know that's a lot because we read a lot, because the final 10 chapters of Genesis is spicy. It's just plain old spicy. The first family is busy realizing the consequences of their former selves and of their former tales and manipulations and lies and so on and so forth. So that is all I have for us today. Tomorrow we will be reviewing our reading of Exodus 1:1 through Exodus 15:18. And, you know, Exodus starts with a Pharaoh, but not the same Pharaoh. Because typically in the Bible, Pharaoh is not a particular person, but a type of person. So anytime we're reading the Bible, we need to understand that Pharaoh is not a typical person, but a type of person. And Exodus begins with some words in regard to a Pharaoh. This is Sonia McCullough Lockridge signing out for the Bible Study Studio. Be blessed in the Lord and have a blessed day.